Hi everybody, it's Sarah Cray with Let's Make Art, and I wanted to do a video where we quickly go over basic watercolor supplies, what to look for, and maybe what you need. I just want to say I'm going to run through these fairly quickly, and I will do a deeper dive of each of these things later. If there is something specific that you really want to know, maybe about brushes or paper, paint, whatever we talk about, please comment and I can make videos kind of answering some of those questions. Okay?
Excellent.
So the first thing that we are going to talk about are watercolor brushes. Now, when it comes to watercolor brushes, you need to make sure that you are actually purchasing watercolor brushes. If you're familiar with acrylic or oil paint, you can kind of use those interchangeably, and we kind of like treat them like crap a little bit. I mean, I did when I painted with them, but with watercolor brushes, you do want to make sure that they are for watercolor and that you don't mix them with other mediums, because the bristles and how they are made, they're a little bit more delicate, and so you really want to take care of them. Okay?
Sounds good.
So when you're first starting with watercolor, I would highly suggest getting a round brush. A round brush has a thicker base with a narrow top, and what this does is it allows for a thin and thick line depending on your pressure. So if you wanted a thin line, it would be light, and then you can go to thick pressure. Ooh, that's a thirster brush. Press down for thick, and then you lighten again for thin. And the nice thing about this is because it allows for the thin and thick lines, you don't have to be going back and switching your brushes and picking up different paints, okay? It's a great way to just keep painting and not get waste time of your paper drying by grabbing different brushes. So if you're just starting out, I highly recommend getting a round brush. You're just gonna need two sizes. I would say like a 2 and a 6 or a 2 and an 8. So do a smaller sized round brush and a larger sized round brush, and that will honestly get you where you need to go for a lot of what you're trying to paint, okay? Now remember, for light pressure, or thin lines, you're gonna do light pressure. For thicker lines, that's when you kind of hold it more towards its side and really utilize that full belly of the brush, okay? The next brush that you probably have seen, and which might be good for you to add to your arsenal, is a wash brush, which is just this square brush right here. And what this will do is it will be easy to get a nice, thick, even line, like so. So this is really great if you're doing like landscape paintings, if you're trying to paint the whole page of an area. It just quickly fills up an area, and it's a bit easier to get an even flat wash with this type of brush. Okay?
Perfect.
The last thing that I want to show you is a liner brush. Now, these are fantastic because even though with round brushes we can get a thin line, it actually takes a lot of practice to get your pressure right to get that really thin line. So if you get a liner or a rigger, so it could be called a rigger or a liner, they're both the same thing. It's much easier to get a nice thin line because of just the shape of the bristles. They're even in length and they're long in length. And so they're just going to like spread that paint out evenly throughout your brushes, which is going to make it so much easier to get thin lines. And this is great for if you're doing details like grass in a landscape or whiskers on an animal or fur texture, that type of thing. A liner brush is my go-to. So to recap, rounds are where you're going to want to start for sure. If you get two different sizes, small and a big, you're good. You can even do a small, medium, and large if you're feeling kind of like, let's do this. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Washes are great for even washes, filling up spaces quickly, and landscape painting, okay? So I just want to point out that this is all one size. They're going to have sizes here that are going to tell you how big these ones are. Like for example, I think this is a 1-inch wash. So you see the different size difference?
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of pay attention to that. And that's why on website, that's what the different sizes mean, is basically the actual size of the bristles. But the shape should stay the same consistently throughout. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Perfect. I will say that there are lots of other different types of brushes. We have riggers and filberts and fans and quills, all of that kind of stuff. If you have specific questions that you want me to go over, please leave those in the comments. These are kind of things that you can learn and develop as you get more into your watercolor practice. But if you're just starting out, I would say, these kind of 4, if you can go with those 4 brushes, you're set, and you can do so many paintings with that. Okay?
Perfect.
Perfect. One last thing I want to talk about with brushes, we're going to see here that there's different brands, and within the brands, they have different lines. So for example, this is Princeton's Velvet Touch. This fan is from their Princeton Heritage series. This here is from their Neptune series, and this is from their Select series. Different series under the brands have different qualities. For example, the Heritage Princeton brushes and the Velvet Touch have a really good snap of the brush, which means when I bend the bristles and it comes back, see how it just snaps back into place?
Mm-hmm.
As a painter, a snap brush gives you a bit more control than a non-snap brush because that bristle kind of remains the same. So you can keep your angles like the same across the whole thing because it will just snap back into place. With brushes that like their Aqua Elite or maybe their Neptune series, the bristles are a little bit softer. So you see when I bend it, it stays bent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which is not a bad thing. It just means that you need to be a little bit more aware as you're painting the overall angle of your bristles as you're painting because it's not going to snap right into place. I would say for beginners, it is easier to use a snap brush. However, everybody is different. So please don't be afraid if you try one that's a little bit looser, that doesn't have a strong snap, and you respond better to that, well, then go ahead and use that. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Do what works for you. All right, so that was just a basic overview of brushes. Now we're going to do a basic overview of paper. So when it comes to watercolor paper, you're going to see probably 3 different types that are most common. One is a cold press, one is a hot press. There's also like a rough pressed. I don't know if it's actually called pressed. I just know that it's called rough. So what you need to know between cold press and hot press is cold press has a texture to it. So if you were to feel the paper, it's not slick. It has a tooth to it, has these indentations that you paint over. And so the pigments in the paints will adhere to that paper a little bit more. And also there's a tendency for maybe the paint or the pigments to kind of settle within those toothier textures. Okay?
Okay.
I preferred cold press paper over hot press paper. And you probably won't be able to really see this on the video, but here I just want to try and show you the different textures of a cold press where it does have some indentations and some textures. Probably most common question is just like, how do you know which side to paint on? Well, if you buy it in a pad or a block, whatever side is facing up to you, that's the side that you paint on. If you buy it in sheets, it's usually the side that's facing up. Basically, the sides that is facing up is what you want to paint on. However, if it's 100% cotton paper, you can paint on the back and the front. I have done so successfully. They're slightly different textures from each other, so it just kind of depends on what you want to do. But I don't want you to stress too much about it. Okay, just know that if it's facing you, that's usually the side that you should be painting on. Okay, a hot press paper is actually butter smooth. Okay, so this is a hot press. I don't know if you would be able to see the texture difference, but there is no toothiness to this at all. It is just a smooth paper. It doesn't seem like watercolor paper because there is no texture to it. The nice thing about painting on a smooth paper is that your brush, especially if you're doing details like with a liner or, that kind of thing where it's really delicate, thin lines, is it's much easier for you to control the marks that you're making on your page because there's no texture of the paper to kind of like mess with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for artists who really enjoy doing like realistic, like scientific illustration type of thing, I think hot press is more common because it's much easier to really control every element of it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I have used both. You do have to approach them differently. Cold press is probably my go-to. Hot press, I kind of have fun with it. It's something that I keep in my supplies because sometimes it's nice just to switch things up a little bit. But if you're just wondering, like, what do I just need to do to get started? I would go with a cold press. Okay?
All right.
There's a few different ways that you can buy paper. The most common is in a pad like so. And so with the pad, you would have X amount of sheets, whatever they say here. One side is glued. You can either paint in the pad or remove it and then paint wherever you're going to paint. You can also purchase it in a block. A block means all 4 sides are glued down like so. Okay, so I can't lift off of this. But what they usually do is they leave one corner. You have to find it. One little corner or edge.
Maybe.
It's there. It's just, oh, there it is. So you see right here, that gap in the black. So the black is the glue. And then here you have to take like a palette knife or something to kind of remove it when you're done painting. The nice thing about buying it in a block is all 4 sides are glued down, so you don't have to tape your paper. Okay?
All right.
You just need to be really careful when removing it so you don't accidentally tear into your paper. It also can be confusing because a lot of time with blocks, they'll use black as the edge glue. And so then when you're in the store looking at it, it looks like black paper. But it is not. It's white. So just like pay attention to that, okay? Because I have seen people being like, I bought black paper. I'm like, no, just open it up. It's white. You can also buy it in large sheets, like 22 by 30 sheets. And then from there, you can cut it down or tear it down to whatever size you need. The large sheets are the most cost effective. However, they take the most work because you have to cut them down to whatever size that you need.
And they're probably easy to mess up, like bend them.
Yes, I would say that too. With watercolor paper, traditional watercolorists will stretch their paper. That means they take a piece of paper, they evenly wet both sides with water, they use a gum tape to tape it and let it dry, and then after it has dried, that is then when they paint on that. Stretching your paper removes the starch from the watercolor paper, which will then make it so it does not warp as you're painting. However, I don't like doing all of that, and I just want to paint when I feel like painting. So for me, I don't stretch my watercolor paper, and what I use is I just use a tape to tape down all 4 sides of my paper while I'm painting, because then that will at least hold it while I'm painting and it kind of starts to warp a bit. Warping in watercolor paper is common. You're not doing anything wrong. If it really, really bothers you, even if you're using tape and you still can't get past the warping, you can try stretching it to see if that helps. Also, if the painting is finished, there are ways that you can flatten your paper. I've used an iron before. I've also used the spray and like a press. There's a bunch of different ways. If you have questions, just ask. But you can flatten it after. The other thing I want to talk about is on the paper, you're going to see, along with hot pressed or cold pressed, you're also going to see a bunch of numbers and weights. The most common weight that I would say is 140 pound. Okay. There is less pounds, like a 90 pound, and there is a higher pound, like a 300 pound. So I have a 300 pound here, and I just want to show you the bending difference. So this is 140 pound. Okay. So it can bend pretty easy. This is a 300 pound. It cannot bend very easy. This is like a card stock, almost how thick it is. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you wanted to do something and you really didn't want to deal with the paper bending at all, then maybe a heavier weight paper is what you're looking for. I would not go less than 140 pounds if you can, just because a 90 pound watercolor paper is going to be so thin that it's probably going to warp and bend so much that it will not be very fun to paint on.
Can you put one of the pads up so we can see the numbers?
Yeah.
I just want you to pay attention that there's also a grams per square meter, a GSM. Mm-hmm. So don't pay attention to that because that says 300, but it's 140 pound. You're telling people.
So it's going to be usually from what I've experienced, these two go hand in hand. Like it's just different ways to talk about the weight, isn't it?
Right, but if it was 300 pound paper, that 300
would be over here. 300, and then this would be a different number, right?
Right, like 600 or something.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. Like, pay attention to which label is behind the number.
Oh, yes. Good call out. So basically, these two, if I'm correct, these two are saying the same thing, essentially, right?
One's in metric.
One's in metric. Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah. Grams and meters are metric, and pounds are imperial.
And also, I'll say that watercolor paper is, I feel like a lot of these brands are based out of Europe. And so that is why we're doing, there's, the metric here, but it's 300 or 140 pound GSM. Is that what we said?
Yeah,
GSM.
Grams per square meter, GSM.
Okay, perfect. So that's what you're looking for when it comes to watercolor paper. You'll also notice that this says 100% cotton. 100% cotton, I would say, is a gold star when it comes to watercolor paper. However, it's not entirely necessary. I have met with other watercolor teachers who are very much like, You have to get 100% cotton paper. You have to get Winsor and Newton paint, and you have to get these brushes. And I just don't create like that. I don't paint like that. I actually learned watercolor on not 100% cotton paper. I think I use Canson XL, which is a wood pulp paper. And it worked fine. It just depends on what you're painting. So like for me, I did a lot of illustration. I did a lot of floral and animal illustrations on that, which wasn't like a full page painting. And that worked great. The other thing that worked great is that I didn't have any money. And so it was wonderful that I could buy a pad of watercolor paper for $5, and I did. And that is really what started me painting. So work up to this if you feel too intimidated by the price. With a wood pulp paper or a cellulose paper that's not 100% cotton, it is going to be a different experience. The paint is going to react a little bit differently on it. The 100% cotton paper really absorbs the paper, and then it kind of makes it easier to do like an even wash. Like the paint disperses more evenly, but it's a lot thirstier. Whereas a wood pulp or a cellulose paper, the water kind of stays more on top. Does that make sense? It doesn't
You're
totally.
painting on it, not in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not going to be as thirsty, and it's going to have a tendency to create blooms or those kind of like harsher marks a little bit easier. I'm not opposed to a good bloom though, so things like that never bothered me. So I really don't want you to feel like you can't utilize those, because you can. It just depends on what you want.
Excellent.
Okay, next thing that we're going to talk about are different types of paint. Okay?
Paint.
Watercolor paint can come in 3 different ways. Oh, sorry, that was loud. We have liquid watercolors, we have tube watercolors, and we have a pan set of watercolors. So, pan watercolors and tube watercolors are both paints that are pigment based. So they use different pigments and gum arabic as their binder, and usually something like honey or like that to make it like smooth. And that is what they mix to make the paint. Okay. These are essentially the same paints, except this is pre-dried. So the paint itself is going to be the same. This one just has been put in here and dried, and then this it stays like a creamy texture in the tube. The benefit of the tube paints is they're more cost effective, right? Because you get the tube, you have this whole thing, it goes in a cream. You do have to dry it yourself though. And you might say, well, why do I need to dry watercolor? Well, you want to dry watercolor because you actually don't need to use a lot of the pigment or the paint itself, because water is doing so much of the work in watercolor. So what you do is you would take some tube paint, you would put some on your palette, and then you would let it dry overnight. And then you would come back and reactivate it with water and just paint with it. Whereas this comes already dried, so you can just paint straight with it. Okay.
And you don't paint it wet because it's kind of just a waste of paint. You use more, not on accident, but just by.
If you paint directly from the tube, you're going to, and not let it dry out, you're going to use way more paint than you probably need to, and you'll go through your tubes of paint much faster. Okay? Now, when it comes to liquid watercolors, and this is showing how I didn't know a lot of things when I first started, was I wasn't aware that liquid watercolor was not a very common type of watercolor. And the reason why it's not super common is because these are dye-based as opposed to pigment-based, which means they're fugitive or not light fast. And what that means is that if you paint with fugitive paint, then if you put it in direct sunlight, that color will fade. Okay? However, the benefit of painting with the liquid watercolors is because that they are dye-based, they are extremely vibrant. Okay, they are so vibrant that I truly fell in love with watercolor because I painted an orange carrot and I just about died with the vibrancy. I had so much fun. It was so gorgeous. And that is why we use liquid watercolor in a lot of our tutorials and our paintings, because this is what I originally fell in love with. When it comes to vibrancy of your pans or your tubes, you have to really get professional quality paint because of how much pigment they're using. That's going to make it more expensive, more professional. And that I couldn't spend $15 on a small tube of paint, but I could spend $5 on this and I could get great vibrancy. I was also an illustrator and I scanned a lot of my work. So it didn't really matter if it was light fast because it was going to be digitized anyway. The other thing I want you to keep in mind, though, is just because it's a tube or a pan, that does not automatically mean that it is light, fast paint. Okay. It depends on the type of pigment that is being used, which will determine its light fastness. So if you look at the color and the brand, it usually will say on the tube of paint, or you can look on their website, you can Google it, the light fastness of it. One last thing is if your paint has dried, whether it's liquid, whether it's these pans, whether it's the tubes on your palette, they all can be reactivated with water. Okay, so don't feel like you need to wash your palette off every time you go to paint again. Okay.
Okay.
All right. The last thing we want to talk about are palettes. So if you get like a pan set like this, which is nice because the colors are curated, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to think too hard about the colors to get. It kind of comes with these mixing areas, which can work as your palette, which is fantastic. If you're buying tube paints or liquids, or you don't really have that travel tin, then you're going to need to have a palette to put your paint on. Okay. Here are the most commons that you'll probably see. This is like a $1 plastic one. Here is a butcher tray palette. And then this is like a ceramic glass, like Maker Made palette. These are probably my least favorite. Because they are plastic, they are hydrophobic.
Yep.
Which means, what?
Good word.
Thank you. Which means when you put water paint on this, it's going to bead up. And that makes it really tricky when you're mixing colors, because you're going to mix two colors together. And then as soon as you swoop it, they suck right back into each other. You see, it just like disappears right into it, which then is like, dang, what color was that? Or what color did I mix? It makes it really tricky. The nice thing about these are super affordable. Okay. So if you can only get these, you can still use them, but you would need to use an abrasive material on them to kind of break up that surface tension and make that so then the paint will not go back into itself. And you can use something like toothpaste. You just rub toothpaste all over that thing, you wash it off, and then when you go to put paint on it, it won't suck back into itself.
A magic eraser would probably work as well.
Oh, yes. Mr. Clean Magic Eraser. That's great. Or maybe a sandpaper.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Okay. This here is a butcher tray palette. And what we need here, the reason why I like these is because I have this beautiful area to mix. I like to mix my colors. I very rarely will use straight paint from the tube and go to my paper. I like to mix a lot. So with these butcher tray palettes, the center kind of lifts up a little bit. So you're not going to want to put your paint right in the middle, because it can just, like, especially if you're using liquid, it will just bleed to the sides. So you're going to use the edge as a way to put your paints, and then you just mix in the middle. Okay?
Excellent.
They come in different sizes. They're great. This is a ceramic artist made one. These are a little bit more pricey, but I like supporting small businesses. And with watercolor, there's really only like small things that you can like really spoil yourself with. So I like to do that. However, honestly, the best thing you can do is go to your local thrift store, grab a white dinner plate for $1, I'm sure, at a thrift store, and that's what you use to paint. Okay.
Or just steal one out of your kitchen.
Or just still, like I have done so many times, much to the chagrin of my husband.
We have 2 plates left.
We have 2 plates. The rest are in my studio. The biggest thing you want to remember whenever you're using a palette, though, is that it needs to be white. The white of the palette will then reflect the color accurately, so then you know what the color is actually going to be when you put it on your paper. If you're using a brown palette or a gold palette or just any different colors, it's kind of tricky to actually see what that color is on your palette, and it's going to look different on your white paper. Okay?
All right.
Okay, so that was just a basic overview. We will go into more details. If there's something that is confusing or you want more insight on, please comment. I would love to see it. I would love to help you on this journey. I just want you to remember a few things as you're starting. 1, it's completely normal to feel overwhelmed. I very much was overwhelmed when I first started. I even had a supply list when I walked into the art store, and then I was like, I still am so confused and lost. Don't let that stop you, okay? Number 2, as a beginner of something, we really feel like we have to know all of the answers before we paint, because we don't want to make a mistake. And I just want to like get rid of that idea altogether, because when you come with a beginner mindset, even if you're using supplies how they're not supposed to be used, it doesn't matter, because you can maybe utilize it in a new and exciting way that works really well. Okay? And nobody has all the information when they first start. So we think that if we have all of the answers, it will take away the fear, and it will take away the chance of us making mistakes. You're going to make mistakes no matter what. So the biggest thing that you can do is just start. And number 3, please do not get into your mind that you have to have the most expensive of everything in order to make valuable art. You do not. The biggest thing is just creating. That's what this whole thing is about. So if you create best with a 25-cent sheet of watercolor paper over a $5 one, because then that doesn't scare you, there is nothing wrong with that. I don't like it that we create this hierarchy of supplies to create valuable or good art or artists. I think that's kind of silly. So just figure out what your goal is and then make sure that you're trying to utilize supplies that meet that goal. If you're feeling frustrated with your what's the word, like results, it's possible maybe that you're just not using the right supplies to get it. So then that's when you can experiment and see if you can try something different. Okay?
All right.
Thank you guys so much for your time and good luck with this. And I'll see you next time. Bye.